Welcome to the Pockets of Knowledge podcast. I'm your host, Desiree Stanley, here to share some amazing conversations. We're talking business, health, making and saving money, or starting something epic. Think of this as your go-to spot for stories that do a lot more than just kill time. They spark ideas, give you a boost, and perhaps even change the way you look at the world. I'm pulling in the experts, the thinkers, the doers, and the dreamers. We're about to dive into stories that open doors and ideas that light up your brain. Here we go. Welcome, everyone, to the Pockets of Knowledge podcast. I'm your host, Desiree Stanley, and with me today is my guest, Mary Beth Schrudder. How are you today, Mary Beth?
I am doing awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
I am thrilled to have you on the show. This conversation today, I have been looking forward to it. I think it's going to be so fantastic. And I cannot wait for you to share your story and your journey with the listeners today. Just to tell the listeners a little bit about you, Mary Beth, you are the founder of Day One Life Coaching. You are, oh my gosh, just multifaceted. You're a spiritual transformational life coach. You're an author. You have created the coolest law of attraction deck cards that we're going to talk about later. You are a podcast host as well. And so you're going to share that with us a little bit into the show additionally. And so I can't wait for the listeners to learn more. But Mary Beth, I love to have my guests share how this journey came to be for them, what led you down the road to get you to where you are now.
Oh, yeah, sure. That's a great question. And essentially my life, every single thing that I teach is something that I went through personally. And some of it's very dark, but I got out of, right? I healed from, I recovered. So for me, being from the corporate world and not really enjoying that, once I actually got through this healing and I hired a coach and I was like, oh my gosh, this was such an amazing experience and such a huge part of my wake up call and recovery that I knew that as soon as I knew what a coach was, I was like, that's my calling. Like finally in my 40s, I found my calling. So it's never too late, you guys. It's never too late to find your calling because I really hated being in the corporate world. And now I am a free spirit. I'm a solopreneur. I'm not really an entrepreneur because I don't have employees or anything like that. I actually like keeping it small and just me. It works out beautifully. That's what I like. But it's just really been a journey of addiction. Like I really had 30-year struggle with alcohol. That's a huge thing. So I help people with addictions and I help people with addiction awareness because a lot of us don't really, I didn't know. I'm being honest, like I was in denial most of that time. Like in my bio, I said I was secretly battling addiction. It was also a secret from myself because I couldn't see it. It's really hard to see ourselves when we're in the midst of these things. And the funny part is I was already a coach. I'd healed from a lot of other things, but I'm like, so 2 years into being a coach and teaching law of attraction and teaching people how to live their best life, 2 years already into it, I'm getting a niche for addiction recovery. Like I'm adding it on. Now I've got like 10 niches that I do. You're right. I'm multifaceted. And I was learning about alcohol addiction and I was like, oh no, like I really didn't see myself that way, even though people had tried to tell me over the years, oh, you're drinking a little too much, especially my ex-husband or my mom. But my mom never drank a drop in her life. So I kind of blew that off. Like she didn't understand alcohol. She never had a drink. And I thought, I'm cool and fun and you're lame. That's what I thought. And then my ex-husband, he was controlling, and main reason we got divorced, he was controlling me in every way. So I didn't listen to that either. But in the back of my mind, I think intuitively we know, but I kept pushing it down. You drink to numb yourself. And that's what we do with addictions, right? We're either numbing ourselves, we're escaping our reality, which I think for me, it was both escaping and numbing because a lot of my addiction started in childhood. And I could get into that story if you want, but it's a different direction. When I say my addiction started in childhood, I wasn't drinking well, actually, my first drink was 11, but I actually feel like childhood trauma is when a lot of addictions start because something happens that makes us feel scared or insecure. And a lot of people don't even know what traumas are. Like my parents divorced when I was 5. Like, oh, no, it's no big deal. But I grew up in the 70s. It was a big deal because there was no therapy. No one even talked about it. Like I totally remember my dad coming out onto the driveway. I was just like in the driveway by myself playing with a ball. And I remember it. I was 5. And he was like, I'm not gonna be living here anymore. And I was like, okay. And that was it. And my mom didn't say anything. It's weird, right? And no one comforted me. And I had a blankie. This sounds like silly, but it's a trauma to a kid. I had a blankie. They thought I was too old for this blankie at 5 years old. The same timing of this divorce where my one parent leaves and I hardly saw him anymore. And he was kind of emotionally absent anyway. He has his own demons. Gosh, that was my self-soothing. And that's what we're doing with addictions, right? Is self-soothing. And they took that away. So that's more of a small T trauma. We call them big T traumas and small T traumas. So anyway, I found out later about my dad that he struggled with alcohol, and his dad, my paternal grandfather, he actually died of cirrhosis of the liver while my mom was pregnant with me. And I didn't ever meet him, obviously. But an interesting story with that is I found out about that whole situation through a psychic. Isn't that crazy? Yeah, a psychic told me. So I was finished with the session and I'm at this like expo. It was a psychic expo. I get up and I'm walking away. She comes and chases me down. She's like, come back, right. She's like, your grandpa's here. He's making me he's choking me until I come get you. Because I already paid, right? He made her go get me. So she comes to get me and sit back down. And she says, you've got to be easier on your father. And you got to forgive him because he was really, really severely abused by his father. So he abused the entire family. And that's why he's emotionally absent. And that's something very, very interesting is if you consider it that way, he did a good job because he wasn't abusive. He was just absent. So I think that gave me an anxious attachment style, which led to my toxic relationships later too, and just anxiety in general. Because my little kid brain was like, oh my God, if my dad left, then my mom might leave too. That was parents can leave? What? And without therapy, without anyone explaining or sitting me down. And I had a younger brother and an older sister. I was in the middle of the two. And we all handled the trauma differently. Like, actually, I think being the middle child, you're kind of the invisible one anyway, a little bit. Sometimes that's how it was in my case. So I tried to get attention a lot in a more of a negative way because it's like, well, negative attention is better than no attention at all, right? And that leads up to the 11-year-old incident where I had my first drink. But yeah, a friend of mine and I, we were actually on vacation, and her parents left all this alcohol on the counter, and we tried it. And I can just tell you, this was the first time in my life I didn't feel anxiety. I was like so relaxed, and I was like, this is the answer to all my problems. I'd never felt that way before. And I loved it. That's a red flag, by the way. If you love alcohol the first time you try it, that is not a good sign. Yeah, I was just like, this is it. This is it for me. What is that? What are we doing? We're self-medicating. And I have been diagnosed with anxiety and depression and OCD and ADHD. And I'm happy to say I'm on zero medication. And we don't have to be, we need to learn how to manage these emotions and our thoughts and our feelings. We need to learn that. So I'm not telling people to get off of medication if you're listening, but I'm saying, like, I am not on it now. So hopefully that can give somebody some hope. But while we're on medication, you need to be doing the work on yourself. Otherwise, when you try to wean yourself off, you're still in that same place as you were before. That was why I got started with the alcohol. I didn't become a regular drinker at 11. You'll probably be happy to know, but I did at 14. At 14, I got a boyfriend, an older boyfriend who was 16. And I definitely was the anxious attachment style person, very clingy, definitely a people pleaser because as a child, when you feel invisible, if you don't feel, this is a Gabor Mate quote that changed my life, rocked my world. He said, when you don't feel wanted in life, you're going to make sure that you're needed, because that's that anxiety where, you want to make sure that they might not need me in their life, but want me, but I'm going to make sure they need me so they can't either dump me or abandon me in some way. Cause I had that abandonment wound from childhood. Right. And there was a lot of neglect going on in the 70s for everybody, I think. But my mom had put the three of us with a neighbor who was not taking care of us at all. She didn't know. It wasn't her fault. She's paying this neighbor, and we didn't know different because we don't, when you're a kid, it's just you're normal. Like, I didn't know, I remember being hungry all the time, which probably led to my food addiction. It's like an imprint on your soul when you're always hungry as a kid. And I remember asking this lady for food and she would never feed us. And then my mom would get home from work about 7 or something, a single mom, and it was just my life. I didn't know to tell on her or anything like that. Does that make sense? So I think that was the beginning of my addictions.
Well, that's truly understandable, and thank you for sharing that with us, Mary Beth. It's so, so powerful, and I think that many of the listeners, and I know for myself, I can see parts of my childhood. My parents divorced when I was very young as well, and growing up in the 70s, absolutely, there was a lot of, like, "Just go outside, and I don't wanna see you until the street lights come on, and it's 10 o'clock. Do you know where your kids are?" They had to have a television commercial that reminded parents that they had children and where are they. So there was a lot of what we think now is neglect. We realize was neglect, but it was not recognized in that way at that time. I really don't think. But that's a whole nother story for another day. But thank you for sharing the journey with us and kind of what led to how you got to here now. And that's working on healing yourself so that you can heal and help others to heal.
Yeah, and a lot of the addiction stuff, I can tell you, like, what I didn't know. I mean, there were some signs, like I did get a DUI, for instance, in 2008, but with alcohol, I think everyone listening would agree. It's so glamorized. It's normal. It's a bigger part of society than, I mean, anywhere you go. If you go to a party, if you go to a restaurant, they expect you. Like they're like disappointed if you don't order alcohol. Oh, my bills are so good now, by the way. Like I save so much money. I've not had any alcohol for over 5 years now. And 2 years before I quit, I had already slowed down a lot because I was doing the coaching. And guess what? I liked my life better. So I wasn't feeling that in the corporate world. I was like, I cannot wait to get to happy hour. Like it was my reward at the end of every day. I hated my life. That was the escaping reality part. And it was just like what I looked forward to all day. And I every day found there was always somebody to go to happy hour with me. Mine was red wine. That was my vice. And so, yeah, in 2008, I was going through my divorce and I did get a DUI. I was driving home. It was Valentine's Day and a bunch of friends of mine, we went out downtown Cincinnati, where I live now. And it's like a 30-minute drive home. And I remember having someone gave me a shot like right before we left. And they had no food at this place where we were. And so I actually felt okay. They were when I left, but the drive home, I could feel myself getting like it's starting to affect me as I was driving. So essentially, I remember thinking in my mind, like, uh-oh, what should I do? Should I pull over? Because I think all the alcohol I drank throughout the night, I didn't only do that one shot. It was just catching up with me as I was driving. And I got pulled over. I was only like a couple miles away from home. At first, I was freaking out, but then I started talking to all my friends, like, oh my gosh, you guys, like, no one ever talked to me about a DUI before. And everyone I talked to, they're like, oh yeah, I've had one. And it was like no big deal. And so it should have been a red flag, but it ended up not being one because everyone I talked to had either had one or their best friend had one or their mom had one. Like it was so common. And I was like, oh, okay. And I did this 3-day getaway and I kind of had fun at it, to be honest with you. And it just didn't really affect me. I just kind of put it away. And, I lost my driving privileges, sort of, but it just wasn't really a wake up call for me at all. I wouldn't say it was a rock bottom. There were times when I did notice it got progressive and like I was really kind of a happy person when I drank, but there was times like I'd have too much and it would switch and I would get like argumentative. You know what I mean? And I didn't like that part about it. So that was something that I was kind of like, I'd have to apologize the next day to people. And I was like, okay, where's that coming from? I think that's part of the progressive part. And when I was getting that addiction recovery certification, that's when I read this book called Alcohol Explained by William Porter. And he actually is not a doctor or anything. He is a guy from the UK who was doing some research on sleep because he thought he had insomnia and he couldn't figure out why he couldn't sleep. And then the more he researches, the more he realizes, oh my gosh, it's the alcohol. Because I think at the beginning when we drink alcohol, it does a wonderful job with anxiety, but it turns on you eventually. There's a saying that I don't know who said it, but it's drinking alcohol is like pouring gasoline on anxiety. And that definitely became the case for me. In the beginning, it helped me with anxiety, and it slowly over the years started to turn on me and cause anxiety. So, what he said in the book was, since alcohol is a depressant, most of us know that, what our bodies do is a natural, normal thing is to create stimulants to counteract the depressant. So, about 4 hours after our last drink, that's when the depressant wears off, 4 or 5 hours after that last drink. And then probably sleeping by then. For me, it'd be 2 or 3 in the morning. I would wake up completely stimulated because the depressant wore off, but your body still has created all those stimulants. And the moderation stops working because, like, let's say I only had 1 or 2 glasses, your body creates stimulants during the first drink based on your usual. So let's say usually I have a whole bottle, which is easy to do, guys. It's easy to have a bottle of wine. It is. If you're out with your friends, it doesn't take very long. So no judging, but I could easily have a bottle and a half. And I'm small too. Like, so it was way too much for me. I'm 5 feet tall, 100 pounds. So I should not have been drinking that. I admit it, but I would be left with just so overly stimulated with my heart racing, my racing thoughts, all the chatter. And that was because of the alcohol wearing off and what our body does. And when I learned that, that was the best thing ever because I couldn't unlearn that. I didn't quit drinking immediately, but I no longer had peace with it. I was like, okay, because I'm a life coach at this point already. And I'm like, I knew too much about the law of attraction. Once I realized, because I was blaming my hormones for everything, I was blaming my hormones for everything. And guess what? Probably it was my hormones, but nothing dysregulates your hormones more than alcohol. So I quit. I did quit drinking alcohol shortly thereafter, not right away, but I did have an energetic shift, and we could talk about that later. But when I did, guess what? I didn't have insomnia. I didn't wake up in the middle of the night anymore. And I didn't feel immediately amazing. 3 days of it, your body's going through detox and had a lot of brain fog. And I'm going to tell you, I felt good though, just knowing, because when I did quit, I had this energetic shift where I knew that I knew that I knew that I knew that I was never going to have a drink again. And I tried to quit before, but I knew this was it. Like, there was no question in my mind. I haven't been tempted since, I promise you guys. Like, it's gone. And that's that spiritual shift where before I think I was just white knuckling it, which means you're still really, really tempted and you're just stopping yourself and blocking it, but you haven't taken care of the root cause. You haven't had the spiritual recovery. And you're still that same person with the old identity trying to pretend like you're not, but you really are. So it really is an energetic shift that needs to happen here. But yeah, I just remember that so clearly. And I felt good the whole time, the first 30 days, because I was so happy. I felt like I broke out of prison because I trusted myself for the first time. I didn't trust myself before. And that's how it is with any addiction, is you make promises to yourself, you make rules and you break them, and then you can't trust yourself. Like, I was the same damn way with cookies, sugar. Like, I was the same way. Like, I don't have everyone needs to ask themselves this. You might be completely different from me, but I wasn't good at moderation. Some people have the ability to dial it up and dial it down, and they can moderate. And I'm more like an on and off switch. I'm really great at abstinence, but once I get started with something good, I'm like, one more, like, I don't want one cookie. I want the whole sleeve of cookies. It's good, right? You just got to ask yourself that question. Are you somebody who's good at moderation or not? And there's a quote by St. Augustine, says, abstinence is easier than perfect moderation. And if you have the brain of an addict, and I do believe the brain of an addict, I mean, it's scientifically proven, is different, then you're going to really notice that it's just easier. It's just easier to not even have that first cookie. And by the way, don't be mad at yourself for being addicted to sugar and fat, because food and processed food and ultra processed food is made to be addictive. It's intentionally meant to get you addicted. It's addictive. It's addictive for everybody. You remember that? I just popped in my head. Is it with Lay's potato chips? No one can eat just one. They brag about it. So in other words, this alcohol is addictive to everyone too. It really is. However, have you heard of naltrexone? This pill, naltrexone. Okay. So naltrexone is a drug. They sell it in the United States. It's prescribed by doctors for people with food addiction more so than anything. But a friend of mine who was also, so we tend to find friends like us, right? So I had 2 other friends who were trying to quit drinking the same time that I was, and alcohol. So my friend saw this documentary called One Little Pill. And I believe it's narrated by Claudia Christian. And she's talking about this pill, naltrexone, and she's talking about a method called the Sinclair method. The thing is you take this pill, like if it's food addiction, you take it an hour before you go to like a buffet or a party where there's going to be a lot of food. If you're trying to quit drinking, you take it an hour before you imbibe your first drink. You take it an hour before. And what it does is it shuts down the pleasure centers of your brain. It's an opioid or opiate blocker, some people call it. And the brain of an addict is more so like you get more pleasure. You just get so much more pleasure than a typical brain, we'll call it. I don't, for lack of a better word. We ordered it from India because in the United States, the last thing you want is to be labeled an alcoholic and you're on your health forms. It's gonna be consequences for that. So we order it from some pharmacy in India, like they recommended to do on that documentary. So that Sinclair method is for people who want to keep alcohol in their life. And that's why they do it. And I'm not on that, by the way. It's just, we tried it. So I took this pill an hour later, have a drink, and it was the most amazing experience to me. It blew my mind because I felt drunk. Like like one glass of wine, I could feel like a buzz. A buzz is a better word. And I didn't care about it. Like it wasn't pleasurable. And what they say in the documentary is it makes your brain like a normal brain, a typical brain. So you don't get all that pleasure that, we get our reward center is like huge. And that's with everything. We just get more excitement about things, more, more of everything. And it's a wake up call again, because I was like, wow, alcohol is not that powerful. It's my brain that has this power, because all I had to do was take this pill and it's doing something to my brain, and alcohol no longer has any power because I didn't want that second drink. For the first time in my life, I understood that's how people leave half a glass of wine at the restaurants. I'd be like, what are you guys doing? I'll drink it. Give it to me. Like, I was like, what in the world? So I got it because they're not getting the same pleasure. No wonder I look so weak. No wonder, because they don't have the same experience that I'm having. So that was very interesting, I thought. And that was a huge step. There was a lot of steps. Like I said, I think it was about 2 years from the time I recognized I probably need to quit to where I actually had the whole, we're done. So be gentle with yourself. Anyone who's listening, it's a journey. And if you're going to do it right, give yourself that time and don't be so hard on yourself and don't beat yourself up, because all of that blame and shame and guilt is going to keep you in those lower frequencies. And it's going to be really hard to quit, because that's kind of what part of that cycle is. Oh, I feel guilty and I feel shameful, so I'm going to drink to feel less guilty and less shameful.
My gosh, that's so fascinating. Thank you for sharing that with us. Like, wow, so many good points in there. And I had no idea about that pill that you were just describing. So I'll link the information for the documentary in there so that the listeners can check that out, as well as the book that you were sharing, because that's so interesting to me as well. And this idea that we think that we're not sleeping well because of all these other issues, when it's the alcohol that's disrupting everything, that our normal body process would be smoother. This is disrupting all of that. So super fascinating. I will absolutely include
system.
that.
It controls everything. And then,
Yeah.
and anyone listening, you don't have to have a rock bottom. I didn't really have a rock bottom. I just had a lot of crappy mornings and a lot of, not feeling good and not feeling, I knew how important it is to keep your vibration high. So it got to a point where I'm like, I'm self-sabotaging. Once I had that awareness, like I said earlier, once your mind's expanded, you can't unlearn some of these things. So don't read that book if you don't want to quit drinking, because it gives you the facts, and you can quit for vanity reasons. I had released 20 pounds when I quit drinking. I definitely had that issue. I could tell I was gaining weight. It felt out of control. And it was because my systems, my endocrine system, my insulin resistance was starting to happen in my body. Well, when we're younger, we can pull all this stuff off. I knew alcohol is bad for our liver. I knew that. Everybody knows that. I knew we're getting our nutrients depleted. That's pretty common knowledge. But what do we say? Well, I'm just going to take these supplements. I'm going to take milk thistle. I'm going to do B vitamins. I'm going to do this, or find something on Amazon. That's what we do. And I would buy organic wine. I tried everything to try to keep alcohol in my life. Organic wine. Then I would go, okay, well, let's try beer. Since I really don't like beer, what would I do? I would drink some beer, and then I'd be cloud of judgment. Then I'd go buy some wine. So it never failed. And that's how it was when I went to happy hour. I would buy a bottle on the drive home. If I could just stop, I didn't have that stop button that a lot of people have. Like, have a couple glasses with your friends and stop at the grocery store on the drive home. Then I'm going to probably finish that bottle too and not feel great. And it was just this, in my head, I kept telling myself I can stop. And I kind of had that sneaking suspicion where my life was going to get a lot better if I quit, but I kept procrastinating. And that's something I would like to say is, oh my gosh, that's my biggest regret is not doing this sooner, because my life's a complete 180. And my business grew so much and I started attracting clients who were committed. And before that, I was attracting clients, but it was like hit or miss. I still had a good vibe. I still had a good vibration going, but it wasn't like anywhere near, because I wasn't doing all this stuff to sabotage myself. And now I set myself up every day to have the best day, to have the most success. And that's going to look different for everybody. You know, I've got my nighttime routine, I got my morning routine, I've got things that I do every day. And that's something that you don't get to this point where you're like, okay, I'm done now, like with raising my vibration or whatever. This is daily work, the same as like when you go to the gym and you go, okay, my body's finally tip top shape. I'm done. If you stop doing all that stuff, your body's going to go right back. And it's the same with your vibration. This is daily maintenance on your vibration. So that's what I love. I do love teaching law of attraction, because that's really all the stuff I learned about that. And I already knew, and I was already teaching. Once I realized that alcohol is just such this lower vibrational substance that was like no longer a match and no longer serving me, I was like delved into law of attraction so much. And that's what really got me to where alcohol wasn't even an option anymore. Like, there's no way I could do that to myself because I'm self-sabotaging. And I didn't make that connection before. I really, like I said, it's my hormones. Guess what? I'm 50 years old now. My hormones are completely balanced. And a lot of my friends are suffering from a lot of horrible, I know you have some guy listeners too, so sorry guys, but perimenopause and menopause issues. And they're the drinkers. They're the drinkers. It doesn't have to be as bad as it is. And it goes with our food too. Getting that sugar does the same thing to our hormones. So I don't do sugar anymore. I just don't even get started with it. And guess what? You don't crave what you don't have in your body. I don't crave alcohol anymore. It's not in my body. That physical craving went away after 3 days. The rest of it's emotional, spiritual, mental. And then when it comes to sugar, it's kind of like cocaine. Like, I don't crave cocaine because I don't have it in my body, you know? And it's the same thing. Somebody told me the other day, I don't have proof, I didn't look it up, that sugar's 9 times more addictive than heroin. I've never tried heroin, but I'm like, well, that's interesting. And I believe it was really hard to quit sugar. It was really hard. Sometimes you're just going to need to have a little bit of suffering before you get to the point. There's got to be some sort of catalyst. Like, one thing that I could tell you I did that's embarrassing, but I'll share it. I overdid it because I could moderate sometimes. That was what the tricky part was. I could moderate like for months, but I was always going to end up back overdoing it. So it just became not worth the trade-off, not worth the risk anymore. But I overdid it one night, and I had a client early the next morning, and this is a huge turning point. 7 a.m. was when the grocery store opened, and I was like there right at 7 a.m. because I knew the hair of the dog. I knew the only way that I could calm down. I had such anxiety. Hangxiety is what we call it. And I was so mad at myself because I was up at 3 a.m. and I couldn't get back to sleep. And I was like all shaky with anxiety. My nervous system was so dysregulated. I was so mad at myself. So I go get this bottle of wine at 7 a.m. And I bought a gift bag because I was so embarrassed that I'm buying a bottle of wine at 7 a.m. I also bought a gift bag to pretend like I'm going to a party later, right? And so it was just a really low point. It could be something like that. That's not really a rock bottom. Like, I didn't blow up my life, but that's embarrassing. And just like I said earlier, it could be vanity, just wanted to lose weight and be healthy. And you don't have to wait until something bad happens to live your best life.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And I know that it is one of those moments that you just look back and you go, oh my gosh, I cannot believe I did that. But thank you for sharing it, because I think it's great for other people to hear that it doesn't have to be, like you said, you're not blowing up your whole life, but it's those little moments like that when you begin to recognize there's a problem here. And that could be the turning point for somebody in their life if they're recognizing something like that. This just needs to stop. And so thank you for sharing that. And there's so much that you said in there, really, truly, that I think if we just pause and look at our life and the actions that we're taking, the things that we're doing, the compromises that we're making that are not good. We can make a different decision, but we've got to be looking at those things, not ignoring those things, right? So I think that's so great. I just love it. Thank you for sharing this with us. There's some things in there that you said I want to touch on. I mean, there's so many things, but you talked a lot about when we started that it's about being aware that we are addicted. Okay. And so you're talking about some of these things that you were beginning to see in your life were indicators that you had addiction. So, what are maybe some other things that people might be needing to see that could be indicators for them?
Well, I think and that's the hardest part is self-awareness. And like I said, you really start listening to things and paying attention to yourself and catching yourself, because what we're doing is interrupting patterns. Like, are you making rules for yourself where, like, okay, I'm only going to drink this? Are you a little bit scared of yourself when you go out at night? Because I was scared of myself. Like, what am I going to do tonight? And I had this kind of uneasy feeling because I didn't trust myself to moderate. And even though I promised myself, so breaking promises to yourself is a huge indicator. Lying to people. I was a little liar. Like, I would have a drink before I would leave the house. So people, maybe more than one. So people weren't counting my drinks or judging me. I just wanted to hide. I hid stuff from people, like my mom, but I always justified it. I always made it like, that's because they just don't get it. They're not drinkers. I didn't really put the blame on me for the lying. Like, I had to hide it because they were so controlling over me. It's just interesting. Denial, how we lie to ourselves. It's a strange phenomenon. It really is. So are you doing things like that? Are you, and just like maybe keep a journal too, like how much are you drinking? Because, and we do the same thing with food. Like, when I started to put stuff in my food app, I was like, holy crap, how many calories I'm eating? No wonder I'm gaining weight. I think a lot of the stuff is subconscious. We don't even realize, like, people can sit down in front of the TV and eat a whole bag of chips easy, not even think about the calories. So if you force yourself to go and log them and pay attention and to make these subconscious habits, bring them to your conscious mind where you can become aware. And like for me, the spiritual recovery, a lot of the spirituality is that self-awareness. It's going from this life of addiction to a life of purpose, a life of an inspired life, a life that, like, because now a huge part of the reason I have zero desire for these substances anymore that are bringing me down is because I love my life now. So if you have a job that you hate, you might feel stuck, but you're not stuck. I thought I was stuck too. And like I said, I had that coach that made me realize these are limiting beliefs, and it's just so hard to see ourselves. So don't beat yourself up. It's the hardest thing for us to see is ourselves. That's why I always reach out for help. Like, I'm an intuitive life coach. So a lot of times when I'm dealing with a client, like, I know things that they won't tell me too. It's just, that's helpful. That's definitely helpful. So yeah, did that answer your question though?
Yeah, no, those are some good points in there additionally, and kind of a reminder that give yourself a little bit of grace but be honest. And I think that that's such a great point because we do these little tiny things. And I know I've shared it on other podcasts, like where there's a food tracker app and it's like you're not putting in the total number of things that you actually ate. It's like, oh, maybe it wasn't quite that much, or maybe I just won't put that one in. And so those are the little things that you're talking about where you're sort of lying to yourself about what you're actually eating or actually drinking. Yeah, go
The
ahead.
pores, the size of the pores. Like, that's like everybody lies about that one, like especially with wine. You're like, I only had one glass, but that's like half the bottle usually, if you do a big pour. And that was definitely my pour. So I could easily say I had 2 glasses of wine, but it was a bottle of wine. And I could do that. I only had 2 glasses, and you just justify and rationalize things. And for me too, the alcohol kept me in toxic relationships too, because then you're numbing yourself, you've clouded judgment. And in today's modern dating world, like, everybody's drinking, right? I have a lot of clients in this situation where, like, by the way, now I only attract beautiful, happy, healthy. Well, you know what? I'm going to take that back. Because if you have an attractive energy, you can attract all kinds of people, but that becomes up to us to be discerning about who we're going to allow our energy. But when we're not drinking, guess what? You're going to be way more discerning, and you're going to see red flags. And I used to go out dating and I would drink on the first date, especially, and just, I would think I really like somebody. I wouldn't ask the right questions. And like, so I'm a relationship coach too. And it's like, okay, my acronym is love. For the acronym is L is for lifestyle. Ask them about their lifestyle. Do this while you're sober. Do not drink for the first 3 dates. And you know what's funny is I started going on a bunch of just date one. I didn't even get to date two because I asked the right questions and I knew this isn't a long-term match for me. So ask a lot of questions about their lifestyle. O is for open heart. Do they have an open heart? Like, are they open emotionally? V is for values. Values matter so much, even if you think they don't, and you're like, oh, we get along in all these other ways. If your values don't match, that's going to be a huge problem in the long run. And then E is for expectations. And that could be as simple as like, look, I've got a dog and a cat, and if somebody doesn't like animals, that's a deal breaker for me. What are your expectations of where you're going to live in the future? What is one person want to live at the beach and then your date wants to live in the mountains? These are things that we need to talk about on our first date, because otherwise you're wasting your own time and their time too. And it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with that person or you. It just means you're not a match, and you need to ask these questions. And everybody's drinking while they're going out on these dates. All these dating apps are so crazy right now. And I hear the most ridiculous stories that could be eliminated if people just weren't drinking, because people are having sex within those first 3 dates, sometimes the first date, and you're having sex with a stranger and then you're wondering why things didn't work out. I mean, hello, it's not really a mystery here. And then you end up getting in these toxic relationships, or you think somebody's a great fit because you didn't ask the right questions, because they were cute. We're dating people for superficial reasons when we need to be focusing on the character. And so that's how you're going to stay out of those. You might still attract some duds for sure, men and women. You might still attract somebody who's not a good match, but when you really need to vet these people.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, though. I love that acronym, and you're absolutely right. When we're not sober, when we're not clear-headed, we're not asking the right questions, we're not seeing these things that really are glaring red flags about people. And so then we just let it slide because we don't see it. And then when we do see it, we're just like, okay, but maybe not. And you keep dating them. And then you're right, it is a waste of time, your time and their time. So thank you so much for sharing that. For the listeners who are in the position where they are looking for somebody to share their life with, you've got to be really intentional about that, right? And
Date intentionally for sure. And if you're like, oh, don't drink on a date, what? Like if that's scary to you, that's a red flag for you to take a look at. Why is that so scary? Because it shouldn't be. You should be able to go on a date with a person sober and it'd be okay. Or like, and then if you're thinking about, am I addicted to alcohol? Go for a week, like without it. If going for a week without it freaks you out, you're addicted. Like anything, I have this list of addictions that I don't want to forget to say, because this is what people do to seek relief. And scrolling addiction is like the main one. Like everybody just gets stuck. And then within that is validation. We're addicted to validation on social media. I catch myself doing these things. I put my phone in another room because I just know, like, it's about being mindful, paying attention to yourself, interrupting those patterns. Shopping's a huge one. And I bet a lot of your listeners work. Like work is a huge addiction. And I got involved where it becomes imbalanced. So anything that's imbalanced, anything that's affecting other people in your life or yourself negatively, but you still have a hard time stopping, that's the definition of addiction. And I have sports written down, because if people don't realize how much that can take over their life. I dated this guy who was obsessed with the Dolphins. And he would stand in front of the TV right in front of it and be watching it. And then if they lost, which they lost all the time, this is a long time ago, but they were like, never won. He would just be in the worst mood for not only that day, but for the next 2 days. And I broke up with him because of that. I just thought he was ridiculous. But now I look back, that's an addiction, because he's not even a player or the coach. That's crazy. Video games for kids. They're like escaping their life. They're in this fantasy world, and it's okay to have a little bit of fantasy. It's okay to watch a little bit of Netflix, but when it turns to binging, that's when it becomes a problem. And that's something that people need to decide, like how often. And do you know what? The toxic relationships is a huge addiction. Like that's like, I get more clients who are in codependent or trauma bonds than alcohol, to be honest with you. Because usually the people, by the time they come to me, they've already decided they need to quit. And I don't really take clients that are in huge active addiction because they're not ready yet. You need to be at that place where you're already committed and you've determined you have a problem, or else honestly, you're not going to hear me. A lot of things I say, you're not going to be on the same frequency. And that's why I don't want to waste your money. But there's gambling. And then it can even turn to like Addictions can start out good, like exercise and dieting, and then it could go to that extreme. So you could have something healthy and make it unhealthy. I did that. You want to replace an addiction with something healthy, and I'm all for cross addictions. That's what it's called. I became a gym rat, but like I said, I overdid it, but then I found my balance. So it's okay. If you're going to overdo something healthy for a while, just make sure you eventually find your balance, keep yourself in check. And overthinking, negative thinking, these negative thought loops, that's an addiction. Like I said, I was diagnosed with OCD. I was addicted to thinking these thoughts. I thought somehow I could control things with my thoughts and my feelings. And I thought if I think this, and that's a lie. That's a big lie. All it does is ruin your present moment. And I got out of that. So, like, I'm living proof, diagnosed with OCD, that you can eventually manage those thoughts and feelings and realize we can't control anything. And getting stuck in those negative thought loops is literally an addiction. So it makes sense that someone with the brain of an addict is going to have that tendency to get OCD like I did.
Oh gosh, Mary Beth, thank you so much for sharing that list with us. You're absolutely right. There's things in there, the sports especially, that's such a great point. Like, how frequently do we see people who are just like their team, and if their team loses, the response that they have from that, and it's incredibly sad to say, like, the result of that is often domestic violence and abuse and things like that, because they are so wrapped up in their team and the winning and the losing. And that's not just players, it's viewers as well. So, I mean, it's a good thing that's included in your list as well, because I think
And
it's
guess what
true.
they're doing while they're watching sports? Drinking alcohol, which leads to domestic violence. Like, that's another thing. Alcohol with me, it feels like such a scam. Like, so in the 1930s through the 1950s, tobacco companies were literally paying doctors to prescribe cigarettes. Okay. And I feel like we're going on with this. I feel like that's what's going on with alcohol right now, is we're finally just starting to wake up from this. It's like how much of a scam it is. It's such a moneymaker, but they're not putting these warning labels on alcohol like they do with cigarettes, okay? There's not a warning label that tells you, oh, by the way, it's a group 1 carcinogen right up there with tobacco and asbestos. It's not on there. There's something about birth defects, fetal alcohol syndrome, that's on there, and they tell you not to operate heavy machinery, but they don't mention, oh, it's linked with 7 different types of cancer that we know of. I believe it's linked to a lot more than that. Domestic violence, like you mentioned, but it's a group 1 carcinogen. No one talks about it. Like breast cancer and colon cancer, I believe, are the top 2 that it's linked to. So, it's different degrees, but I think throat cancer, which makes sense. Yeah, but there's a lot of heart disease and diabetes and all of these things because like I said, even I was getting the insulin resistance, and that turns on you quickly, by the way. And it's just there's so many different ways to die from alcohol. It's insane. There really is. And if you can control it, great. But if you can't control it, hopefully some of the things I said will wake you up. And it's really true that the traumas from childhood or traumas from your adult, like traumas happen to us as adults too. It's not just childhood. I know people who've had family members commit suicide or something. That's horrible. And then they start drinking, or maybe they're a war veteran or something like that. And it's like they get isolated. They isolate themselves. They can't bond anymore. They can't find any relief. So that's why they're going to find something that's going to help them bond and help them find relief, right? And that's all it's about. So it's nothing to feel guilty about. It's something to just recognize and change so you can actually live your best life, because you don't have to be stuck. You don't have to be stuck in addiction. It's a vicious cycle. It really is.
And thank you for bringing that point up again, is that we're talking about underlying issues that are happening, whether it's from your childhood or current. And so, again, it's a really good reminder that you need to be addressing what's really going on and not using these external things, that the food or alcohol or drugs or whatever, to try to make your right, push it down or try to make yourself feel better. So again, great point. We've got to look at what is really going on and work through that with a licensed professional or a doctor or whoever, a life coach, the level that you need. If you need professional psychiatrist, work with them, right? It's like you just need to get help.
Maybe you need rehab first. Maybe you're there. Like, for me, I had this, and everybody's different. I had to do the spiritual recovery. I had to do all the spiritual stuff and dive in that way. That's what worked for me. Other people would hate that, and be like, oh, that's just woo woo. But I couldn't do the usual, the usual stuff just didn't turn me on. That's probably the wrong phrase. You know what I mean? It just didn't do it for me. I needed all the spiritual, like I've always been a spiritual seeker, had a paranormal life, all of these things happened to me. So I never had the luxury of wondering, are ghosts real? Like I knew they were. And I always had things like I was a sensitive child, always had like the ability to sense other energies and beings. And that's also another thing that I was trying to numb myself from, because that can be very scary, especially as a child growing up. And a lot of us are empaths and we don't know it. And we think all these feelings are our own, but we're really feeling other people's energy. So it's really important to learn that and sort it out.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so you touched on that. And so let's go that direction now, because you have had some really very special moments and paranormal experiences. And so, do you want to share a little bit of that with us? And then let's talk also about your addiction recovery with the law of attraction card
Yeah.
deck.
So I'll tell you the spiritually transformative experience that happened to me that I didn't know why until, like, I feel like I recently had figured out why it happened to me at age 18. So this was like 1993, I think. I was living in Texas at the time, and I was always a spiritual seeker. Like I already mentioned, I was reading this book on near-death experiences, partly because I was afraid of death. Even though I could see all this stuff, or I don't know, I was always just seeking comfort in that area around death. And so I'm reading this book on near-death experiences, and something in it triggered this response. And I had this 2 week, like I was in my body, but it almost felt like a near death experience while I was in my body. And there were no words for it at the time. No one was talking about anything like this. There was no internet. I didn't have any guidance. I went to bookstores and the library. That's all I had back then. But basically, I was in this state, which what I'll call now maybe 5D, because I was like it was like a quantum experience. And everything was I could see all these, like, everything's connected. It was just pure state of the highest frequencies for 2 weeks, unconditional love, bliss. I just would think a question and it would download to me. It was like I was tapped into this universal knowledge, which I call God or source energy, whatever, infinite intelligence, whatever you want to name it. That's what I call, and I was like, oh yeah, this is how it really is. It was more like reading about the near-death experiences. Whatever was in that book it reminded my soul, it was stuff I already knew and that we all already know, but it triggered it. And so it just put me in this quantum experience. But what I think now, the reason that I was given that experience is because I was meant to teach this, and I needed to embody it, not just read about it. I needed to embody that experience so that I could later teach it with confidence. But what I'm going to tell you, I don't know this, but what might have been a thing, because this is what happened. I started to come out of that frequency and got back down to what we'll call 3D, time, physical, space, reality. And it was a huge contrast. Went from this love, bliss, highest frequencies of joy to back here. Wah, wah, wah. And I got really depressed and nobody understood me. I'm trying to talk to people, and I was just this weirdo that people were like, you need to be committed, like, what are you talking about? Totally unrelatable. There weren't books or anything where people talked about these experiences, and other than a near death, but I was alive. And so I got really depressed. The only thing that my 18-year-old brain could figure to do to feel connected even a little bit again was drink alcohol. And I wasn't drinking or doing any drugs during that experience. It was purely triggered by reading a book. So we can have these spiritual experiences without ayahuasca or plant medicine or anything like that, just so you know. But yeah, so that's when it got bad again, is during that, because there's a saying about enlightenment. It's like, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. You're still you, and here you are. And now what? Right. And I think if it happened today for the first time to me, I'd get on the internet. I'd find a ton of people who would also happen to. I'd find a guide and learn how to integrate it into my life properly. That's what I didn't have when I was 18. But what I think is, I was supposed to have that addiction experience so I could teach it. Same thing. Like, I had to have all of it. My life unfolded perfectly, and life is what's that saying? Life is happening for us, not to us. Right. And I'm looking at it that way, because I wouldn't change a thing. I would not change a thing. Everything that happened in my past has led to where I am now. And I love my life. And once we get out of these, the way to get out of these addictions is by doing what you love, is by changing those limiting beliefs that you're stuck where you are and living that inspired life. And you're going to raise your vibration and these addictions are going to fall away. I literally, I couldn't even, like, alcohol was becoming disgusting to me towards the end there because my vibration was just, I couldn't even stand it anymore. It's like, what am I doing? It's literally just a habit at this point. It's just a habit. I don't even want it. It's so that's what addictions are. They're habits that went awry.
Oh my gosh, thank you for sharing that with us. That's an amazing story. And so is this like kind of what inspired you to create the card decks, or how did that come to be?
So that was after I was already sober and I was what Abraham Hicks would call in the vortex. And that's kind of like what I feel like I was back when I was 18, like seeing the world through the eyes of source. So I was just at these high frequencies, walking my dog. Cause I've never been there 2 weeks again, by the way, but I can get in there momentarily in glimpses, but not like anything like it was, that was really meant to hit me back then, obviously. But I was just out walking my dog in these high frequencies, feeling in the vortex. And I got this download to make these cards. It was just put in my head. And for anyone who doesn't know what that is, it's like sometimes like you just receive a thought instead of, you could tell the difference when it's just dropped in your head. Like you're not thinking. My brain was completely free of chatter in that moment, which is very unusual. So, because I got the ADHD brain, but I was completely free of thought and chatter and long enough to get this downloaded. And I was like, okay, I know how it works because when we get these downloads, we need to take that inspired action. There's no law of attraction without taking action. We could do a whole nother show on all the misconceptions of law of attraction because like I teach it the right way. And that's what's in my cards. Every single card teaches law of attraction minus the misconceptions. And it has all of the techniques, all the spiritual techniques that I used to get rid of my addictions, to heal from my addictions. And like I said, it wasn't overnight. You pick a card every day and you shuffle them, you pick one, and you're always going to get the right card. That's how law of attraction works. There's a picture on the front and there's content on the back of each card, and you follow those instructions for the day. That's your focus for the day. Some people buy them just to start out their day in a positive way. Yeah, I have the wording geared towards addiction, but I mean, anytime someone tells me they don't have addiction, usually they have more addictions than anyone else I know. We all have addictions. So we need to get over that first. But we all have some sort of addictions, even if it's something silly like shopping or filling a void. I'm going to buy that and I'm going to feel so good after I buy it. I mean, Amazon's done that to a lot of people, I think.
We think that it's going to solve everything. This thing that I'm going to buy is going to solve everything.
Even if
my life
face
is
cream.
Yes.
I'm going to be, so much younger.
Yeah. Yeah. It's true. I'm raising my hand because I'm guilty of it as well. Thinking that this thing that I'm going to get is going to just make everything better. Then surprise, it doesn't. And I know I'm not the only one who's been in that position. I think many of us have. Okay, so do you have the cards that you can show the viewers on, YouTube? Awesome. I love it.
Addiction recovery with the law of attraction. And I'm going to give your listeners a coupon code so they can get $10 off of the deck. And we're going to use, for in honor of your podcast, we'll use coupon code POCKETS. How about that? So type in POCKETS on my website. Oh, my website's day1lifecoaching.com, DAYONE lifecoaching.com. And you just type in that word POCKETS when you find addiction recovery cards. Also, if you're on there and if you think maybe one-on-one coaching might be something you're interested in, I do offer a free discovery call, which all that is you tell me a little bit about your background. I tell you a little bit about how I work, and it's a Zoom call with me, and we decide, are we a match? And if you're not a match for me, I might be able to guide you to someone or something or a program that might be a better match for you. Because I get it. Not everybody's a match for me by any means. Got to be a little woo-woo to like my sessions.
Thank you so much for that generous discount for the listeners. I love that. Thank you. And yes, I absolutely want you to share all the details of where the listeners can find you. But before we get to that, I would love for you to share about your book and also the podcast that you have. Tell the listeners the title of the book, where they can find it, and then also your show, what it is that you talk about, and what the listeners might find.
I have a book that it's a lot of us in there called The Life Coach's Toolkit, Volume 3. That one's not really like, I'm really The law of attraction addiction recovery cards are the things that I really feel like is going to help people the most. This is published as a book because of the amount of content on it. So it's actually published as a book. And then what was your other question? I'm sorry.
About the podcast.
My podcast is called the Spiritual Transformation Podcast with Mary Beth. It's on YouTube. Right now, I have a lot of interviews that you'll be able to see. What I do is I interview psychics and mediums and spiritual healers and things like that. I've got a lot of interviews up there. You'll have to look for the interview section on my page there, my channel. They call it a channel, and that's on YouTube. And then I also put up little videos that are motivational about things like addiction and toxic relationships and things, everything that I've been through that helped me get out. So that's just me being a talking head on there as well. And then I'm also on Instagram, TikTok. Gosh, I'm on everything. Facebook, I got 2 pages. And yeah, just if you follow me, same thing. I just do clips and sometimes memes, just motivational things, a lot of motivational inspiration. And follow me or follow someone else. Always follow people who are where you want to be. And that's going to be very inspirational because they didn't used to be there. They got there somehow. So find out what they did to get there and do the same things.
Well, do you want to share now with the listeners, like where they can find you on Instagram? If you want to share the Facebook pages, feel free.
Yeah. So you can type in Day One Life Coaching on Instagram, and I'm the one who's verified. There's 2 that'll pop up, but I'll have the little blue check mark. On Facebook, Mary Beth Schrudder, and that's SCHRUDDER. That's my personal page. That's the one I use the most. I also have a business page under Day One Life Coaching there. You know how it is right now. It's just really hard for Facebook doesn't really show your business page too much. So I've been focusing more on my personal page because it gets pushed out into the algorithm. I got to pay for every post if I want it to be seen on Facebook. It's crazy. So yeah, and then TikTok, I believe I'm under Day One Life Coaching too, or it might be Mary Beth Schrudder. That's a great question. But I have a link tree that I'll send you, and that's literally, that link tree has every single link you can find me and a direct link to these addiction recovery cards as well.
Perfect. Yeah, I'll be sure to include that information in the show notes for the listeners to easily find you in the places they like to be. And you're right, the algorithm, it's like we're kind of all, I guess, a slave to it in a way, because if you want people to see what you're putting out there, you got to pay for it, which is kind of ridiculous. But anyway, so is there anything else that you want to share with the listeners that you feel like you haven't said to this point, or the person who is listening, you feel like really needs to know?
Yeah, I think if anything I said resonated with you, a good first step would be getting rid of distractions and just really, because that's going to be the like we said, with any addiction, the first step, self-awareness. So just try to get rid of distractions, go out for walks without your phone. And I'm guilty of that too, because I love podcasts, right? I love listening to inspiring, positive messaging, but we have too much input. So take a break. Take a break every day, like take a 30-minute walk out in nature, especially some type of meditate. Like I do walking meditations or guided meditations, that those are easier for me than just trying to quiet my mind. And by the way, meditating, according to Dr. Joe Dispenza, he saved me on this one. It's just focusing on one thing. Like it doesn't have to be a completely like just focus on your breathing, or focus on, like, you could look at a candle or pet your cat, pet your dog, whatever it might be. It's focusing on one thing, and it's okay to you're going to have some weird thoughts pop in and out, and just witness them go by. Don't expect to be a completely quiet mind, especially in the beginning. So try to really get rid of distractions and try to connect with nature, and really it's really about bringing these subconscious things to the surface. And when you always are listening to something, like I get a lot of intuitive hits in the shower. And I think the reason is because I think water's conductive, number one. And then also we're not tuned in, to anything. So we're actually quieting our mind and nothing electronic. And then some people might listen to music in the shower. Try doing it without music. Try taking a walk without any input, and leave your phone at home. And I know it's hard, but that's when you're really going to be able to tune in with yourself and your intuition. And I do believe that's how God talks to us. And we're going to get that inspired action. But when we keep having distractions, we're going to keep procrastinating and procrastinating and procrastinating. So let go of the distractions. Stop scrolling. Stop seeking validation on and your social media pages like I do. Like, now I know I've gotten so much better at that, but I'm always like, how many likes did I get? That's a hard one, because it's not the likes as much. I want to make sure that I'm relatable to people. Are they getting it? So I'll check. We'll blame that on OCD, because checking's one of my OCD things. So anyway, I just think getting rid of distractions, having that quiet time, trying not to think about the past so much or the future and just being in the present moment. And that's like where all of our power is, like the power of now, like Eckhart Tolle, that great book to read, by the way.
Yes. Okay, great. So that was going to be my next question. Is there any books that you have found to be helpful or beneficial that you want to share with the listeners that you think they should check out?
That one, anything by Dr. Wayne Dyer, Louise Hay, the OGs, right? And then I really, right now, am reading Dr. Joe Dispenza's book, Becoming Supernatural. I'm actually listening to it on Audible, which I regret. Get the actual book because he's always referring to charts and stuff. And I don't have the actual book, so I'm going to order that. And it's so good. And it's Becoming Supernatural. It's all about, I just think in general, we don't realize how much control we have over our lives, how much control we're not using, and how much our thoughts and our feelings and our behaviors and actions, just like we need to just get out of autopilot and start really living a conscious life.
Yeah, great recommendations for sure. I love Dr. Joe Dispenza. His book, Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself, is a favorite of mine. So yeah, that's
That's
one
a
I've,
great one for addiction too. Yeah.
yeah, love it. Good stuff. So thank you. And I'll include that in the show notes. And then is there any other podcasts that you think that the listeners should listen to?
Well, your podcast, of course. Let's see. What do I love Next Level Soul. Like if you're into the spiritual stuff, Alex Ferrari's the host, Next Level Soul. He has a bunch of people who discuss near-death experiences and out-of-body experiences and the woo-woo stuff. Like I'm proud of being woo-woo, by the way. I have a group of friends and we call ourselves the woo-woo crew. So it doesn't have to be a bad term, guys. Yeah, Next Level Soul is probably my favorite right now.
Okay, great recommendation. I'll include that as well. And I'm going to check it out because I like woo-woo stuff as well. And honestly, I think that we've lost connection to that. We all came from that. We've lost connection with it as we're here on this plane. I know there's a lot of people who maybe are operating from a different part of their brain and maybe a little bit more logical and not seeing that connection, but we really all did come from source. And this is like, let's get connected to it again. So that's just my 2 cents on that. Anyway, Mary Beth, this has been fantastic. Such great information. Thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing this with us. It's been an honor to have you on.
Thank you so much for having me. I had fun.
Good. Well, we'll talk more soon. Thank you, dear listeners, for tuning in to another insightful episode of the Pockets of Knowledge podcast. We appreciate your time and curiosity as we explore fascinating topics together. If you enjoyed today's discussion, be sure to join us next week for another amazing episode. Remember, your journey of learning and growth is a continuous adventure, and we're thrilled to be part of it. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Until next week, stay curious and keep exploring those pockets of knowledge.